that I'll be speaking about pandemic and how it is related with literature or how it is reflected in literature. A couple of things like that. You see me, you don't. You fear me, you do. So I see a complete story that is written in monologue. There is somebody who is speaking to someone else. So at least there are two by me, and it is actually asking this question. You see me, and then before we hear from the human interlocutor in the conversation, what we see is that the pandemic itself announces that you do not see me. And then it moves on, it goes on to ask another question, and that question is, you fear me. And this is again something which is tyranny of the disease. You fear me, and then it announces that yes, you do. So what does this suggest? This shows that the story is opening up at least two qualities of the pandemic, two qualities of something that is destructive, something that is catastrophic, something that is disastrous, that we are suffering from, that we have met with, that is all around us, and because of which the world is on fire. So, and the first quality is its invisibility. And the second quality is that it is something that is horrifying, that is something that makes us terrified, that generates, creates fear. And therefore it is important to see whether this fear or this invisibility which are being constructed not just through the media discourses or through the literary narratives, but also by young people like you who think of topics like this, interesting topics. So let us see whether the pandemic is truthful when it says you don't see me and you do fear me, whether there is some kind of truth in it or not. So if I ask you, Azaz and Hiba, because you are in conversation with me, do you think that this pandemic is really invisible? Do you think that this is really something so horrifying that humans are unable to manage its fear? Is that true or not? Because that is where I'll begin the whole argument of how to critically look at whatever is happening around us. Because humans are, most of the things that we do are done in discourses, in speech, in narratives, in conversations. Most of the realities are constructed realities. So when somebody tells us something like a pandemic, something as horrible as a pandemic that has put this world on hold, tells us that I'm invisible, you can never see me, you can never identify me, I can change shapes, and I can scare you, I can scare you to death. So is that true? Is that really a fact or not? Because I would argue against that, and then I'll take you to something that is slightly different off the track. But there is something that I believe and I hope that will make you think critically about everything around us. So how do you agree with me, because I've almost already given you my argument that this pandemic is neither invisible nor something that is very horrifying? Do you agree with me? Now is able to see trillions of light years away. I mean, something that is trillions of, I think 300 trillion light years away from us. Okay, with the help of lenses. There are telescopes, there are microscopes. So we can definitely see the coronavirus, okay? We can see even before microscopes and telescopes were invented, people were able to see pandemics and epidemics and plagues and diseases in the symptoms, in the deaths, in the form of the people who were ailing. So there was this visibility, because humans are ashraful makhluqat. They are, although there is a lot of debate nowadays against anthropocentrism, but still, there is a lot that only humans own and not the rest of the objects, whether these are living organisms or the non-living. But I definitely know that there is something that only humans do possess and not the rest of the organisms and the non-living objects. But the second question is the fear. Is it not the case that humans have always turned fear into their strength? Don't we know how to manage fear? We have been doing that. At the initial stages, most of the human beings, this world is a very tricky, it's a strange place, but humans have dealt with fears. Even the fear of death, humans have kind of negotiated and reconciled with it and are able to now deal with it and have developed a kind of acceptance towards it, and that is quite possible. At the initial stage, for example, when you read fear theory or psychology of fear or biology of fear, you see that fear can be, it is something that is a tool that comes as a savior to us, that actually helps us. Helps us to escape. For example, it guides us through flight or fight. So you evaluate the fear. Through the fear, you evaluate the danger, and then you decide whether you should run away or you should stand and fight the danger. And then at some stage it could be the negative thing as well, and that is where I would like to take all of you. I believe that pandemic is not invisible, and because it was not invisible, it has been kind of controlled in many ways. Vaccines have been developed just because we were able to see it. Fears that are manufactured by, for example, terrorists, by the dictators, by the violent state apparatuses, by the imperialists, by the capitalists. There are multiple fears that are manufactured fears, and we should be aware of them. We should be conscious about them. But then there are some fears which are genuine, which are original, which come with diseases, which come with natural disasters, like this pandemic fear of the COVID-19. But this can also be managed by ordinary people if there were not some opportunistic human beings who want us to be afraid of this. And how do they do that? By creating narratives. And that narrative, those stories may not necessarily be literary stories. They can be, newspaper stories. They could be media narratives. They could be, the discourses that are spread through WhatsApp and, all these social media. And there is purpose behind that. These human beings who do this, who propagate this fear, they do it purposefully, because they are opportunistic. They want to take advantage of whatever is happening around in the world. And that is why in the past, many people have tried to, particularly those people who want to sell their products, the capitalists, the people who control the system, who control the political scenario, the whole thing, the whole world, and those who sit in the think tanks and decide for us, the imperialists and the capitalists. Therefore, we should be careful when it comes to evaluating a fear. I mean, there is healthy fear that helps you flee or rescue yourself or others. There is healthy fear that helps you to fight, to stand against something, to take necessary measures against something that could be dangerous. But then there are fears which are constructed or which are purposefully being created or propagated. We need to be, to stand alert and alarmed and aware against them, so that we are able to, kind of ignore them. I'm not going to, go into more detail here about the fear that is being propagated regarding the pandemic. I'll come back to this towards the end of my discussion. But before that, I would like to talk about how this fear has been received or conceptualized or, told in the narratives in literature. What has been the literary response towards different kinds of fears, particularly the fears of the wars, and something that is the volume of which or the impact of which is huge. So what we see is that there are two kinds of responses, two kinds of response narratives that are written. One is called as Mawzuati Adab. In Urdu, usually they have these two terms that they use, and the second is called as Hadisati Adab. So Mawzuati Adab is like, literature that is created in usual times, and people have responded to different kinds of fears when there was no fear around them, when they were living comfortable, ordinary, simple, or what is usually called the normal life, which is, again, I mean, all these terms are tricky. They are fluid terms. But I believe that all of you have general understanding of them. So people, when they are writing about the catastrophes, when they are living normal life, when there is nothing dangerous around them, that literature is called as Mawzuati Adab. That is like theme-based literature that is not inspired by any imminent danger or any danger that is around them, that is surrounding them. So a lot of dystopian literature is there. You might have read Harrison Bergeron, for example, 1984, and multiple novels and works that are written about that actually theorize the this fear that might take over the world in future. Therefore, dystopian literature, most of the times, it is set in future. So what we see is that, for example, in Harrison Bergeron, we see that technology will take over, and in the name of equality, everybody will be enslaved, and people will be wearing, machines and noise machines and masks. So if there is somebody who is beautiful, would be asked to wear a mask, so that the others who are ugly or less beautiful, they should not develop any complex, and somebody who is healthier should be wearing heavy jackets, so that the other people who are weaker should not be feeling weak, and someone who is handsome should not be looking handsome, because equality is important. So in the name of equality, there would be a dystopian world that will be created. And we see in the dystopian literature that there are images, there are scenes which are horrible, because people suffer from what the other human beings do. So this is like theme-based literature about fear. It is inspired by the theme of fear, not by the danger or by a pandemic or by something that is around us, around the author. The other kind of literature that Urdu literature people call Hadsati literature is the literature that is written in response to a hadsa, a tragedy. Something happens and people start writing in response to that. And that is where I believe is the problem, because many people, they start, kind of magnifying or amplifying or seeing the problem, या जिसको कहते हैं ना उर्दू में बात का बतंगड़ बना देना. That there was, for example, an earthquake, a couple of hundred people died. That, of course, I'm not saying that it's an ordinary thing. Of course, it's a tragedy, and people are sad, and they do want to respond emotionally to the situation, and the best way to do that is through narratives, and that is okay. But then, if there are only, I say this because I'll take you to something that is more important and more urgent towards the end of my discussion. And so, if 200 people died in an earthquake and 50,000 stories are written in response to that, that does not make sense to me. Okay, and I believe that most of Hadsati literature is reactionary. It's written in an emotional wave that is sometimes commanded and controlled by someone who is using that to their purpose. Okay, so what happens is, for example, 9/11 tragedy attracted millions of narratives. Okay, millions of narratives were written in response to 9/11 tragedy. It was a tragedy, and definitely many people around the world, they were sad, they definitely grieved over it. But then what happened was that even today we are living in a post 9/11 age, and the literature that is being produced 2 decades after 9/11 is still being called as post 9/11 literature, because we stopped worrying about everything other than 9/11 tragedy, and we started responding to that. And then there was a response to the response. And what was that response to the response? That was, for example, 9/11 tragedy was there, and then in response to that there was war on terror, and people started writing narratives about war and terror and the tragedies of the people, for example, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Syria. So the same thing is continuing, and we are responding to that, and we have forgotten about everything else. And now we are in a situation where there is this pandemic, and everybody is just talking about the pandemic. And I know, because I have also written a short story and contributed it to a short story collection, and then it was another version of it was published online in an American journal which is called as the Scoundrel Times. So I know that now there are journals that have issued special issues for pandemic. Okay, so people are writing pandemic stories. So the journals, these magazines, they have stopped publishing stories, about everything other than pandemic. They have stopped publishing those stories. They just publish the stories that are about pandemic. Okay, and many publishers are now looking for books, novels that are about pandemic stories. So this is what we call as Hadsati literature. Hadsati literature is usually not seen literarily as mature as Mawzuati literature. Why? Because it is written, its growth is mushroom growth. Okay, it's not it does not evolve naturally, because you have a theme and you start writing in response to that. You have something around you, and because we are sensitive, we are conscious of our surroundings, and of course human beings should look around themselves and write about that. That is, of course, the easiest thing to write about. But then when we do that in excess, that is where I see the problem. Why I see that there is some kind of problem in that, it is because this narrative thing, or the whole discourse around a hadsa, around a tragedy, around a catastrophe, around a pandemic, around an epidemic, an earthquake, is controlled by the selected few people. And those people are usually the capitalists who want to sell their products, who see an opportunity in a war, who want to see an opportunity in a pandemic. You might have seen, prices going up, and people have started, if you read George Saunders is one of the most celebrated American writers. I think he's Man Booker Prize winning author from the United States. He has written a short story which is called as The Red Bow. And this story responds to the fear narratives that were generated and disseminated around the world after 9/11. Okay, so after 9/11, what happened was that this fear was kind of accelerated, or people started amplifying it or disseminating it among the American people, as if the American ordinary people were in danger, and there were some terrorists who would take over the world and America, and therefore American people were made to be afraid of, made to be scared of the Eastern world or the Islamic world. Okay, so George Saunders, in this story, it's a symbolic story and a kind of dystopian story in which there is this little girl who is bitten by a dog and dies. So after her death, there is this very calm, peaceful uncle of hers who starts telling people that they should kill all the dogs in the neighborhood, in the town. Okay, so and he is able to convince the whole town that all the dogs in the neighborhood or in the village, in the town, are dangerous. They must be killed, because there was one dog who bit this little girl. Therefore all the dogs must be killed. So which means that you take one example and you try to apply that over the whole universe. Okay, with the help of a tool that is called as fear. So this is, the role of literature is to criticize or expose such narratives, and this is exactly what George Saunders is doing in his short story that is called as The Red Bow. And my short story that I referred to a while ago, that is called as Kill All the Bats. This was also inspired by George Saunders' The Red Bow. Kill All the Bats is actually a story that responds to a narrative that was being propagated in the United States against China, in the United States as well as in the West in general. So people in the West started calling coronavirus as the China virus. You might have heard this, that even President Trump used to say that this is China virus. Okay, so what happened because of this little narrative? This China virus is a story, it's a narrative, and its impact was that people on the streets started harming Chinese in the West. So there are many Chinese, like in Pakistan there are Chinese, there are thousands of millions of Chinese in the West as well, in Europe and in the United States. So there were a lot of hate crimes on streets in Europe and in the United States, in Americas. And what was the reason behind that? This little narrative, this little term that was China virus. So in my story, I say that it is bat virus, and I try to kind of fictionalize this fact that all the bats must be killed because bats are dangerous. So when you see something like that, so what is happening today is that fear is being managed, it is being controlled, it is being repackaged in more, glossy packaging, in something that is attractive, that people want to look at, that people want to read. So when it is being repackaged and resold and circulated around the globe, and we, the uncritical people, who are ready to purchase, to actually buy this fear, what happens is that then we are a prey to whatever they want to give in as a cure to this fear. Okay, and this is the problem, that we should not be, there is no denying the fact, and there is no question that we should be careful against the pandemic. There is of course, we should be following all the precautions that are being told to us by for example the scientists. But if our only focus would be the pandemic, the coronavirus, COVID-19, and if we would stop talking about the rest of the pandemics that are around us, that means that we are losing, because for us this is not the first pandemic. This might be if you critically look at this pandemic, this is the issue of the urbanized middle classes, urbanized, globalized, educated middle classes. Okay, you might not have heard about any poor person, any mazdoor, for example, a laborer suffering from COVID-19. And there is a reason, scientific reason behind that. And what is that reason? The reason is that, it is research shows that if you do enough of work or workout every day, that that makes you perspire, that makes you sweat, no virus can harm you. Okay, this is what research says, that if you do enough of exertion every day. So our laborers who do manual jobs, they do that, therefore they are not in danger. What are they in danger of is poverty, is hunger. That is another kind of a pandemic. Okay, and nobody is talking about that. In Pakistan, for example, 40% of the people live under poverty line. Nobody wants to write narratives about that. No media, no capitalists, no social media, no Mark Zuckerberg, they will not write anything about that. They will, on Facebook you would see something, and a COVID-19 alert every day when you open your Facebook page. Why there is no alert against poverty, against hunger, against disparity, economic disparity? Because it is not their problem. It is the problem of the third world countries like Pakistan. It is the problem. It is my problem and it's your problem. It's because in Pakistan we are living, 40% of our people are living under poverty line. Maybe the number has increased because of this pandemic now. I think 33% of the children are malnutrition. 14% of the women of the age of these that came from a doctor who was speaking against the medicines, and he says that most of the people are dying because of the over treatment, because of the overdose of the medicines, and not because of the COVID itself. Okay, so which means that this hype is created, and then multiple medicines are sold, and multiple narratives are constructed around that, and nobody is critically resisting that. And you, being the critical people, because you are educated people, you are young people who are being trained as critics, so you should develop this kind of critical ability, that you should know that even something that is as innocent, as ordinary, as clear as a pandemic can also be exploited in favor of those who command and control the whole thing. Otherwise, what for example Camus says in his The Plague, that every one of us is actually carrying a plague inside of us. Okay, and we have no kind of freedom from it. We can never go away from plagues, and probably for example, in The Plague, when everybody is celebrating towards the end of The Plague and towards the end of the novel itself, everyone is celebrating it, and the doctor, who is the central character, I forget his name, but he is thinking that the plague has not gone anywhere. It is still there. It is hibernating. Okay, so the plagues are around us. They will stay there.